Blog Talk Radio. She has consumer and market insights, and she's the CEO. You know, we had a lot of CEOs at the Bowl-a-thon last night, and they were filming that reality show about the CEO, and so there was contestants there and everything, and people were there from No Limit. And when I say No Limit, I'm not saying No Limit bail bonds. I'm talking about Master P's No Limit. Royalyn, we have with us joining us today. Good morning, Royalyn.
Good morning, Cheryl. How are you?
Great, and you. Nice talking to you again.
Glad to be with you again.
I am amazing. Andrew is here with us, and Andrew manages to be pretty happy all the time, even in bad times. But there's a study that came out talking about unhappiness. I guess you could call it. I guess we could call it something else. But let's talk about it because I'm trying to be happier too. And Mr. Dick Gregory was in town this past weekend, and he just talked about, you know, just taking it easy and not being so unhappy. So I wish he were here with us this morning to talk as well. But there was a poll that said, is it Americans are less happy now than they were, and you say 2 years ago, or African Americans? Let's talk about it.
Sure. With this poll, Cheryl, that they were looking at, just talking about happiness, they just kind of asked people in general how they were feeling about everything that was going around. And they did talk to a lot of different groups. And from the different people that they talked to, they kind of pulled out segments. One that you mentioned, of course, was even just looking at African Americans and their answers compared to other groups, where they said that there was a slump compared to the same index they did back in 2011. And so we do see that in some ways African Americans, they say, are slightly unhappier than Caucasians. And then we also see, when they even look at different groups, they did say that women are slightly happier than men. Democrats and Republicans are equally, they say, very happy. But they did say that 75% of white Americans were optimistic about the future in 2011, whereas only 67% kind of felt more upbeat this year. So in essence, the numbers kind of change and they're kind of close. But the main overall that we're seeing out of it is people are less happy or satisfied, or something's going on this year versus previous years.
Well, you know, a lot has happened, and you know, when I look at my life, taking that personally, a lot of things have happened in my life, and I'm just wondering if I am happy. I think I have to work harder at being happy.
Cheryl, that's a real good point. I think one thing we have to look at is just even look at what's been going on in our nation this year. This has been a really different time for us, uncharted territories over the past few years. We're still living through the sequestration that's going on. We know what's going on in Washington, this trickling down, all that's been going on with corporations, with layoffs. We just see what's even just looking at JCPenney in the news and all that's going on. It's just not business as usual in our country. So we know for sure the politics and the job market has played a major role that has affected all of our lives in different ways. So that is really real in what we're seeing with that. And then, too, when we look at certain segments, because I talked about certain segments that the article talked about, but it also mentioned college students as well. And college graduates, there was a slump. We know that, too, because it's a lot harder for them to find the jobs that they dreamed that they would have at this time, because it's just a trickle down of the jobs that are available and who's going to get them first of what's available. So it is real, but I think it's also real interesting. There's another article that had come out, too, through Inc.com, and it talked about 6 unique ways to be successful and happy. And which kind of, you know, goes hand in hand. And I thought it was really interesting because the article asked a question, and it says, is one of the ways to be successful and happy is to stop trying to achieve success and happiness. And what the article went on to say was, and that's something I believe so strongly, is instead of striving for happiness and success, those two things, is what can you do to work on yourself? And that's something we always hear and talk about. Because it says, to think about it, it says that the world is more competitive than ever. We've talked about, just now some of the things that I've named that's going on. And it says how if you really want to have a fulfilling career and a life, we know you got to get ahead of the competition. That's another thing we just talked about. But it says the way you truly get ahead of the competition is you got to look at yourself and look at what are the things you do well and what are some things that you do differently and what are unique things about yourself. And interesting enough, the same thing we're talking about to do as an individual, that's what you do as a business owner and as a company, whether you're a small business or a large business. What are those unique factors and differentiators about yourself that make you special and make you different and make you unique?
Well, recently, actually yesterday, I was talking with young students in the Dr. Emmett J. Conrad internship program, and they were telling me what they were doing on their internships. And one young lady said that where she works, and I won't give the name out, she says that she actually is working in human resources. I know you're a customer service expert, so you know how to tell companies how to have a better, more productive customer service department. And she was saying that people, because she would be sitting at the desk where she had to meet people that were coming for interviews, that she really got to see how they were. And she said she found them to be so rude and that they didn't know that even though she was sitting behind that desk, that she was actually in on the selection process.
That's right. That's right. That is such a very good point. And as a matter of fact, that's something I actually do at my company as well, because so often you see, because of course when the person is going to meet with the owner of the company or an executive, then you see another face. But it's a saying that goes, I know my husband used to have it at the bottom of his salutation on his email, you can judge a character by a man of how he treats you when he thinks that you can do nothing for him. And that's exactly, what you just described, versus being the same all the time. And usually after meetings we would do the same thing. I would get with the person at the front desk and we would all compare notes and to see how congruent or consistent a person is. But that is really, really good, and it really is true, because at the end of the day, in some ways, it's really, from a business standpoint, it's almost harder to, the process is harder in hiring, or you have to be more careful because there's more people who really want jobs, and when you really want it, sometimes people may do or say things they would normally do if the market wasn't as tight or the stress or less happy, and people are striving for those things. So that is really good.
Well, but Royalyn, and for those of you just joining us, Royalyn Reed is here with us, and Andrew is there taking it in, too. Royalyn, you have people, I've been places, and I say, a few years ago, I would ask myself, do they not realize it's a recession? Do they not realize that other people are out there that would love to have their job, because they are horrible when it comes to people interaction?
And that's really true. And I think, too, what we really have to look at, and it goes back to that happiness index as well, even if things aren't as happy, it's a lot harder because, in jobs, we know people who do have the jobs, they're asked to do more with less, probably less resources with help from other team members, possibly in some instances less pay, less opportunities for bonuses or moving up. But even where you are, it's important to just kind of just get a handle of where it is, and even trying to look bigger than where you are, because really that whole company is is really having to watch it. And so some instances is, do we have a job? Do you have a job or do you not? Do you want to have a company to work for or you don't? Because in some instances it could literally be, getting down to that where everybody is having to pull back, like never before for this season. Even I think the strongest, most innovative companies that are going to make it and thrive, whether it's a small business or a large business, has to do that as well. And then that's when it really, from an owner's perspective or an executive's perspective in a large company, you look at what team is going to help you in that process as well. When you really get down to it, when things change. So that's why people have to look at life. This is really hard for me, but what is the big picture? How do I look past from where I am and what's going on with the company from a large standpoint? What's going on in the trends? Almost like that book, Who Moved My Cheese?
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, tell me this, because they have that show, and I just wish that all companies could have someone to do the same thing. The Undercover Boss.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
there have been some bosses who have run into some very rude and inappropriate occurrences. And
absolutely.
I just feel like, that they need more of that. People need to see what's going on. They need to see what's going on, because there are things that people would do, and I think, someone said on one of the shows, I wouldn't have done that if I had known. Well, you didn't need to know to do. It was the wrong thing to do. But you see a lot of it going on, and I think some companies need to know. They really need to know how their employees, because having traveled internationally, and Andrew has a child who's traveling internationally right now, I've just seen different things in terms of customer service.
Very good point. As a matter of fact, my company is a marketing research training company, and that's one of the services through marketing research we provide, which is called mystery shopping. And that's where our clients actually hire us to send in people as customers and measure what's going on and evaluate it, and we provide feedback to them. And when we do that as a professional company, we get all of the details. We can tell them down to the letter who it was, what time, and exactly describe and make that incident come to life as if the manager or executive was there. So that is something, like I said, that we do provide. And it's a really good research measurement. As you just said, that's very valuable. And what it does with companies, when we provide that, it does several things. You see things that are not good, and then what the management can do, they can correct, train, communicate, or reprimand. And in a lot of cases, too, we may catch things where people are doing good things. And then, by the same token, the management can also use that as an example, reward, or different things. So you see a lot of companies now, and we do have one of our companies, too, that we provide that service for. And you do see a lot of your innovative companies using those tools now and investing in their companies. Even while it's tight, you pull back, but you also have to find ways to move forward. And as I mentioned before, is what makes you unique, what makes you strong and better to see that. So that is a great tool that we use, and it's really interesting to see the results as well.
Yeah. Do you run into those egregious acts that I talk about where you just say this person should not have a job?
Well, a lot of that, too, is what we do as a third party when we're hired. And it's important for us to be objective because we don't know the person, we don't know anything, but we go in as a customer. We report the facts. The fact is this person responded this way, whether it was professional or not professional, and we also measure different things that they're expected to do because a lot of times, one of our clients is DFW Airport. And believe it or not, they take that very seriously in looking at their customer service aspects, even down from parking. It's important for that van to pick up the customer at a specific time. So a lot of things we look at are measured. So some of them are for training. Some of it is for compliance, to make sure that they are actually doing their jobs the way they're trained and the way, in this instance, the airport might expect, but also is a way just to help. And when you have your very progressive companies, such as, like a DFW Airport or someone, they're working to make the culture in such a way that it's just part of life. But that is a process, and that's just, one example of a company or agency. But there are a number of them out there. And like I said, we have a number of clients, and those are my favorite kind of clients that we work with who are really working on innovation and solutions internally with your employees as well as externally because they're all connected together.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned the airport because there are some airports, just by virtue of me flying into them, that I get off the plane with a different attitude, if you will. Like when I'm flying into Newark Airport, that was my home base airport, I never got a warm, fuzzy feeling. And I really don't get it flying into DFW, but I do get it flying into like Tampa every time. And so when I'm flying into Tampa Airport, I get in a good mood. So, I get off the plane in a happier, state than I do. I don't know, it just seems like something, it's a pretty airport to fly into. It's usually, you see a lot of green and, it just gets me in the mood. And that helps sometime, I think, in how we respond to people.
Absolutely. That environment definitely helps. And when you look at what really makes it up, in like measurements that we do, it's a combination of everything. Like you said, the customer service, you can't discount. That's way up there because sometimes how people treat you, and this is with us in our personal lives, will take a little bit more. Or, there's a trade-off with some things. But so we know customer service is way up there. But the atmosphere and all of that plays a role in how you look at it as well. And then also I call it a teaming effect, too, because even there's a lot of businesses that, say, for an example, if you go to the mall, and if it's a certain mall you go to and the store did not treat you well, even though the store has a contract at the mall, we're going to say that mall is not good.
Yes.
That mall is not. So sometimes two larger umbrellas of companies make a difference. Even for, say, for an example, like with airports, that same example, you have TSA, the check-in people, you have concessions people, you have the airlines. So a lot of times it's important for that. That goes into the whole play. So you're dealing with a lot of different entities under one umbrella, but it's the big umbrella you're under, or the company, the main anchor company, that gets the kudos or the marks against them. So even, too, when we deal with our clients, that's something you really have to look at, big picture as well. I think that same example, we use one for, like, malls, and, we use an example for airports. But, too, that same thing happens with our personal lives as well, because it goes with who we associate with or what environments or atmospheres, places we go to or we frequent. So that same thing goes as not only when people look on the outside, we are a collection, or we're perceived as a collection of a lot of different things. So it's important for us to look at it as individuals. What are those different connectors that make up who we are and how people perceive us? But it also goes the other way too, because with that, even that happy index, it is what it is in the world, but what are those other connectors around ourselves that make a difference with our happiness and how we view it? It could be, what music you're pulling yourself up with. Is it an overcoming song you're listening to, or if you're having a hard time at work, or is it a song about someone's doing you wrong, someone's cheating on you? Which one, going into work in a potentially difficult situation or an environment that's less than ideal from your perspective, is going to help you go through with your happiness or your attitude.
Most definitely, most definitely. Well, let me tell you, I was at a mall, and I do, folks who, I've heard people numerous times, they use the mall. That's a good example. They say, oh, my, I can't stand that mall. I went to this store, and it's just one store. But I happen to be at the Southwest Center Mall, which was formerly Redbird Mall, and you get a lot of, you hear a lot of negative things. It used to be the mall to go to back in the day when I first moved to Dallas. Well, there is there is the Macy's store, and there's the manager of that entire store. Her name is Joyce, and she I like going in there and seeing her, and she's very cheerful. And so I was in there about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and she was actually working the cash register. And so she was very, very happy and very, very cheerful. And so a woman behind me said, oh, she's too cheerful for my nerves today. And so I said, and she was talking to me. So I said, oh, give her a break. I said, this is the manager of the entire store. I said, so she's probably, she's cheerful like that. And I said, but she's also making up for if you've had an experience with someone who was not so cheerful. And when I told her that was the manager of the entire store, she said, oh, well, she said, well, I'll put up with it then. But it just, when I think about what you're saying, Royal, and it just appears that some people don't want to be happy. They don't want to be happy. They don't care. And they like being miserable. Or maybe they don't like being miserable, but they're just content with being miserable.
Exactly. And that's just something you really do see sometimes and as well. And that's where we just have to look at, even those personal choices of, what's really important to us. But it always starts with ourselves as well. But that's a real good example of when we see on one end what it can be, and but also too what we should be. I always say a lot of times too when I come around people like that, I look at too, that's a gauge at. First of all, it tells you what you don't want to be, but also too is a good index to see exactly how do I compare myself, to make sure my own index, how I'm not like that. It reminds me of, and it's probably true with just humans in general, but I see it with my kids. If they see, I have 2 kids. If one of the kids sees another one doing something that's just doesn't make any sense, they're like, well, that's not right. He's doing this. It's easy for them to see it in the other kid, but not themselves.
Oh, yes. I've been getting that from my 18-year-old, and she'll come and say, this guy was just stupid. He's just doing this. And I said, really? I said, well, did you think about that when such and such? Because, and I don't try to point out everything that they do because, teenagers are just, they're teenagers. You know, yesterday at the Celebrity Bowl-a-thon, a woman came in with her daughter, and the daughter was she was like mean mugging me when, the woman came in. And the woman said, no, don't pay her any mind. She's 16. And that kind of explained it.
Yeah.
It was like, say
exactly.
no more.
Exactly.
Say no more. So, and what does that, you're talking about the behaviors and the study, did it look at different ages? Because teenage girls seem so unhappy.
And part of that too is, and just looking at it, a lot of it is the study pretty much focused on looking at primarily adults in that area, because they looked at different characteristics. Because when they asked people the kind of things, like I said, I have a positive relationship with my family and members. My relationships with my friends bring me happiness. My spiritual beliefs are a positive guiding force for me. So they did ask, basic statements like that people evaluated. My work is frustrating. I really engage in hobbies and pastimes I enjoy. I rarely worry about my health. So those were the kinds of questions that they asked, and they evaluated everyone on who participated in the study. But then what they did, too, is in terms of, although it was focused on adults, they looked at how did everyone respond together, and then how did men and women respond differently, or how did that compare? How did the different ethnicities between white, African American, and Hispanics compare? So then, too, they just looked at different ages, but the age group started at 18.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, who's the unhappiest?
In terms of who's the happiest, and just looking at the actual number, in some ways what they did found, and looking at a summary of the statistics, that overall in some ways they mentioned that, and I'm looking at these numbers, like I said, in terms of the optimistic, which was a larger, it was smaller than last year, but in some ways Caucasians in certain categories responded in being happier in looking at across the ethnic groups.
Well, you came on later, and earlier I was talking with Andrew about Mrs. Lucy Allison, who, almost 100 years old. Can you imagine getting to that point? Well, you have to get to half that point, Royalyn. But we are talking about things because sometimes, life deals us situations, and how we handle them is, I guess determines what kind of person we are or can be. Because I was telling Andrew about Thelma Youngblood, who I've known over 20 years. And Royalyn, I used to watch her taking care of her mother with such care and love. All I could say was that, if everybody had somebody like that taking care of them, if everybody, whether it was in a nursing home or even if you were a relative, because there are some relatives that they kind of begrudge taking care of their loved ones.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's just so important, to really just look at that as well, which a lot of it is just so often your perspective, how do we get to that point, which even goes back to putting people in your lives to learn, And one of the things, too, interesting thing you mentioned that is the article I referred to, which was talking about 6 unique ways to be successful and happy. It talks about build real relationships. Mm. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about, because even that care you're building, that's true relationship and really caring. Sometimes I think it goes to how much a person truly understands in their perspective. Because why is she able to provide that care, you know? And when you look at it, that'd be interesting even ask her. And I don't know if you know that was covered, but that means she understands some things that unhappy people don't understand. First of all, we know that she's looking past and she's looking at things from a perspective bigger than herself. Because she's able to see someone else. Also, the value of someone who's paid their dues in life. And that's something that I think our country has kind of lost, especially compared when you look at other countries. And I know you've mentioned, Cheryl, your international travel. But other cultures really embrace their elders.
Right.
And understand, and that even goes into history, because even when we look at, you know, what some of, you know, our forefathers and people who've come before us, what they went through. And then even when we compare what we're going through and what they've gone through, that helps put it in perspective. Now, I'm not saying it's not easy and it's not a challenge, and I'm not saying the problems have gone away. They're a little different, but yet we understand and we can see. And then also, I'm sorry, you go on.
No, go ahead.
But I think, too, is, and even when you begin to see things differently, that's when you even glean. I know that some of the greatest mentors in my life were people who were older and more mature and wiser. I don't know if you remember, Cheryl. I can remember I said, Lord, give me one nugget. You know, this was when I was younger, you know, because a lot of times, you know, when we're younger, we have youth. With our youth comes zeal, but we don't have the same wisdom. Right. And I said, Lord, if you could give me a nugget of wisdom, even while I was young with my zeal, you know. And the nugget was one thing that older people who have lived, seasoned people, they know time is their ally. And what I mean by that is, can you remember the old days? People say if something happened, they say, keep living, baby, keep living.
Yes.
Because they know that within time, what something looks like today is going to be different tomorrow. Joy can come in the morning. You know, all of those sayings we've heard come together. And I know I've kind of put a lot of things together, but it just goes back with, everything I talked about goes back with serving someone with that example. Serving someone in the nursing home or serving someone who's different, that's older and has gone through things. So, but if you can have that perspective and truly understand what that means, and even as you serve, so often I do believe you get more than what you give and what you can learn and glean from them.
Well, you know, and I think, you know, that could be a lesson for so many people, because I feel like our society, you talk about other cultures, I think our society devalues youth and the elderly.
And exactly, we see that just kind of going back to the basics as well, you know, of where that is and, you know, what it's really about. And that's so important, you know, with everything, because even as I think our elderly shows us, we can learn from the history and glean from that wisdom, but by the same token with the youth as well, that is our future, and we hear that. As a matter of fact, we're seeing that on the workforce as well, because, you know, there's a lot of discussion as we all, you know, we study and look at trends and what's happening at the workforce. You know, it's a known fact that, you know, the exodus that's going to be happening and the change of guard as baby boomers get older and begin a transition out of the workforce. So even just using that same example, you know, in business, is what are we learning and gleaning from those individuals? I was just at an event recently where a lady said that someone who had been in her position for years and years left. There was no documentation. So she had to start all over. Didn't know the connections and relations internally and had to start building a lot of things externally. So that's an example, you know, of gleaning from those who've been there and understanding the value of that. Same thing with our youth as they're coming in and coming up. Are we training them? Are we laying out expectations? I was talking to someone, it was a company they went through that had a really good training program because, you have young people coming in the workforce, and of course we don't know that's diversity within itself, looking at the different age groups. We talked about baby boomers, but this young group, they're used to things fast. They're coming up, with the technology portion, and in the orientation, they actually had a class saying, you know what, you're coming in and you kind of want this big salary right here. It's not going to happen, and this is why. This is how it operates. So it's almost like they, being educating, helping people understand. We don't want to squash their zeal because they bring something great to the workforce. My company, we have an internship program. And with these college students, they think totally differently than I do. But learning to how to even I embrace that as with the internship program, we're imparting into them that knowledge and things, and how do we help them move forward quickly, a quote-unquote, the good old boy thing that when someone just takes you aside and tells you things that you wouldn't really get to know. But by the same token is how can we learn and glean from them in their work style that they can move so fast and they multitask on things. How can we bring that in for life, to take us, to a different place with innovation and strategy. So, we've talked about that same example, whereas in your personal life, looking at the diversity around us, or which also we're doing the exact same thing in the workforce as we're preparing for all of the changes that's going on in our country, which is tied to our overall happiness and overall success.
That is key. That is something, that, even, I pick up lessons all the time from Mr. Dick Gregory. And for those of you just joining us, Royalyn Reed is with us today. And, he talks about, he said people walk around with frowns on their faces like that's going to change something, Now, I know I taught, and I would tell my students, I would actually have them call. There are a few businesses that I would have them call just because I wanted them to hear how the person answered the phone. And I could always count on the person. There's one person, Antoinette, at the, or so she sits at the receptionist desk at K104 KRMB. And I would tell them, call there and just ask her anything and just see what kind of response, because this woman is your first point of entry into that business. And she makes you feel happy to be calling there. And I just love her voice and love her, ability to make me feel comfortable when I call. And this was before I even knew her, knew who she was. She answered the phone, and it was beautiful. And then in contrast, you get folks who answer the phone, and you're like, gosh, and like before they come on, it'll say that this call may be recorded, and you wish that it's being recorded and reviewed because someone needs to hear how that person answered the phone.
Absolutely, which goes back to just that mystery shopping, thing, which many companies do and probably most need to do as well. And so a lot of times, too, that has to do with educating some people. They just really don't know. And communicating or training. And then others who just may choose to stay that way. That's where reprimand and other things come into play. But Cheryl, what you just said is just still so important to do, to gauge and measure, whether you do it formally like what we do, for large companies, or even what you do, that's the same concept. Even small businesses should do that on their own. The undercover boss thing, or what you said, just pick up the phone and just check it out every now and then to see of where it's coming from, or just gauge what the atmosphere is. But even, too, it's just, looking at that as individuals as well as people just have to really understand. And I love what you said about Dick Gregory as well, is because we can just, when you turn inward and you only look at things from your own point of view, then that's when we get wrapped up in that web about my frown is because this is the way I feel. And we never look past ourselves, but truly don't realize the big effect it has on ourselves and those around us, let alone the businesses that we're working for.
Oh, gosh, I tell you, it's something, because, I just like to see, I like to treat people well. And, and there are some things, this is really funny, and it's just, it's really an indictment of, I guess, where that restaurant was, because we went into a restaurant, a friend and I, and, we say, well, do you have this? And everything that we asked for, she kind of attached a price to it. Before we even asked, well, that's going to cost you extra. Yeah, well, if you want that, that is such and such. And we just felt like, okay, we like it, And I just felt, and the person I was with, we felt that this must be a place where they get a lot of people wanting a hookup or something. Because,
yes.
And it got to be but it was almost to the point of being offensive because everything, that costs more. And we never asked about price at all on anything. We just said, my friend is, there's certain things she doesn't eat. So she was like, well, I think I'll just have this, it was some elaborate burger or something. She said she didn't want the burger. She just wanted all the other stuff that came on that burger, the mushroom and all of that stuff and everything. Well, it's going to be the same price. And we never asked,
Yeah.
It was so offensive. And I use a burger as an example because this place didn't actually have burgers. But we went to a place that they did fix that for us. But it was so funny because the place where we went, it was not like the Palm or something like that, but or Three Forks. It was actually a chain. It was Red Lobster. But I think it had a lot to do with where the Red Lobster was and who frequented it, because maybe people ask for hookups a lot.
Exactly, and that's a good point too. And you even look at too, and is that even a training issue? Because like I said, she got that from somewhere. But just understanding the effect that it truly does have, and how does it apply? Because, you see all businesses want to grow, but if you have something like that going on that could truly affect, in the instance like you and your friend coming in there to actually want to frequent and possibly even purchase more than what they were looking for. But that is just a good point we just really do see, and that's just something in terms of training. And it goes back to what you've consistently said, this morning, is how are we viewing, how do you take a look at the whole business operation? From, as you mentioned, the example like the undercover boss, or, I mentioned about the mystery shopping, which you do an informal mystery shopping as well.
Right.
But it's just so important for to take a look at that and truly see what's going on at all aspects. But the most important is starting, directly with the customer, because that's the face of the company. Companies can do all of these great things. However, if you do all of the great things internally, but the front line is not taken care of, then that's truly what the client or the customer is seeing. I can remember, back in the 80s, and I'm sure you can probably remember that too. There was a really big customer search, a push in customer search to say, answer the phone on the first or second ring.
Yeah.
And everybody was trained to do that. What some later research showed in some groups or entities, they asked the customer what was most important to them. To the customer, it wasn't the phone being answered in the first or second ring. It was how they were treated when they were answered, when the phone was answered.
Okay.
So therefore, it's important to know frontline what's important to your customer. And even with that is how you're treated when you first answer. That's not, or when you're provided that service point, whether it's on the phone or in person, we see that hasn't changed. We're still talking about that same thing today in looking at how important that is. And even more so, as things are more competitive, this is the time you should want to provide good customer service all the time. But it really makes a difference now because people have choices. People have choices of where they go. And also, too, is we've actually tracked the trends and really looked into the power that people now have with social media and what they can say about your company. So it's more important than ever to really focus on those things.
Well, and I've seen friends, one of my friends, Renee Seiler, who used to be at Channel 8 and 11 in the Dallas-Fort Worth market, she actually took to social media to talk about an issue she was having with Delta Airlines. Mm-hmm. And it was so funny because I actually got on every day to see what was happening next, how had it progressed, was she getting resolution? And eventually she did. Eventually. The Internet gives us so much power.
Absolutely. And so that also is really changing the landscape of our country. So, we see a lot of things that are changing. We've talked about, even earlier about the looking at politics, the job market. Those may be challenges, especially as, people feel as individuals and a little bit more helpless. But with the social media, that is definitely an area that has truly empowered individuals like never before.
And we don't want people to misuse it and because people can be it gets you have the bullying with young, but you can see bullying going on with older adults too when they use it recklessly, if you will.
And that is a very important point as well, because that can come back and really has this bite us in the end, because when you do have a voice, your voice can be powerful when you use it correctly. It's almost like E.F. Hutton. We have that old saying. We all want to get to a point that when we have something to say, people really listen and take heed. But we also do see, even in the examples on the news, when you can use that social media, it can backfire on you. There have been examples. And then especially, it's one thing to say that to one individual, but realizing the power of social media. So if you get out something that is slander or not true and it goes across the airwaves, then you could truly almost be embarrassed, as we can see even on the media.
Yeah.
And so it's like dynamite. Dynamite can be used to blow up mountains and things, to build bridges, and it has its place to be used. But if you're not helpful, it can also hurt you as well.
Blow up
or others around you.
Yes.
That's right. Exactly. Instead of building bridges, it can blow up some bridges. Very well put.
Oh, yes. Well, Royalyn, it has been wonderful talking with you again and sharing information. And for those, may have gotten in on the tail end, you can always go back and listen. And you can also pick up our publications, because we're going to be sharing some of our tidbits and everything. And, I just one, parting question. Do you think that when I'm going to use small businesses as an example for this question, do you think that when we're planning our businesses and everything, that we're thinking about customer service, that's a component we need to put in, just like marketing? Do you think small businesses are making that a priority, or is their priority their product more so?
I think, Cheryl, customer service, you cannot overlook that at all. Customer service is premier. because in small businesses you look at, are you doing something for the short term or for the long term? If you're developing, long-term business with a customer, then customer service and relationship is what's going to carry you more from just that one job or that one contract. Whether it's, if you have a product that you're dealing with mass people come back and people spread the word. That makes your work a lot easier. It makes your marketing as well as your sales efforts a lot easier if you can take care of those customers, for long-term value and relationship. So I think a lot of people can get off when you forget that. But I think that is premier. Number one, you got to have a good product or a good service. And as we talked about earlier, what makes you unique and special in what you're providing to your customer with that product or service. Then the second thing is, how are you delivering it to them? Are you delivering it in a way that they know what to expect every time? They can depend on you. They can trust you, and also how you're treated. Those are two important things, and it's really hard to have one without another because we've all known those that have had a great product or a great service, but they're not consistent, so you can't go to them all the time. And you can't tell anyone and pass the word.
Right. Well, that's the thing that I found. I can honestly say consistently, even though, I have all the places that I like to go, and I get the same consistency when I go to Sweet Georgia Brown. But one thing I hear from people, because more people go to it, they feel like they get the same consistency out of Pappadeaux.
And that's a good example to the Pappadeaux example. And, of course, there's a lot of other businesses, smaller chains and things, but that is a good example of what I'm saying. When you go, no matter where you go in the country, it's going to basically look the same. The prices are going to be the same. The atmosphere overall is going to be same. And so that's the thing, the key to success in a lot of ways in a small business arena or just in business in general. Good product, good service, and good customer service and delivery that people can count on, and they want to continue to do business with you, and they want to tell others about you.
And that is so important.
Cheryl.
Yes.
And I ask, and Royland, it's just sitting back and just listening. But, part of the customer service is more of what your expectations are. And when people have expectations, they will follow suit. But Cheryl made a great example of when you call K104. You call dreadfully at times, but the receptionist is always on point of making you feel good, and so good that sometimes you forget what you call for because you may have a disgruntled thought there, but she will calm you down before you even get, the point of entry is her. She's the gatekeeper, and sometimes she can diffuse you. But I know a lot of businesses, especially the government, I wish your company could come and work with the government a little bit and teach us how to do it, because I've been in the private sector as far as hospitals are concerned. And when you have certain expectations, people follow suit. In the government, people always think it takes an act of Congress to get rid of them from a government facility. But yet still, we service to provide in the healthcare arena. And again, if we provide good customer service and provide the good product, then people will be more apt to come back. And I know we've been in the negative light as of late with the VA hospital, but there are good services there that's getting covered up by all the negative things that are going on. But Royland, you mentioned something that your husband puts on his email. Can you repeat that back to our listening audience? Because I really like what he has on his footnote.
Yes, and I know, and it's a quote out there that says, you can judge a man's character by how he treats you when he thinks he can do, when he thinks you can do nothing for him. So I'm kind of paraphrasing that.
Okay,
I like that.
I'm living that myself. You got someone that you can really provide, but I don't know if it's, the fear of someone taking over. Now, I'm not trying to take over in any way, and I'm sure a lot of people can attest to that. But when you feel you have something to contribute and you're not given the opportunity, that's how you get disgruntled employees as well, especially when they want to contribute positive things.
Absolutely. And
as
we
a man,
see that.
you have to have that eye, not only the eye, but the ear as well, to effectively manage your product. And as a manager, and I've been there, I always tell my folks, you check your attitude at the door like you check your coat. Mm-hmm. And we all go through things, but you just smile and do what's right for the company.
That's right.
That's so important. Royalyn, thank you so much for joining us. It has been a pleasure, very insightful, and we'll have to get together more often. And we're going to have to get you out and see if you can bowl, too.
I'm telling you, it's been a few years, but I have to get out there. I hope I still have it, but I'll have to come out there and see.
Well, it was really interesting. It was really interesting because last night, Randy McElwain from Channel 5, who people always get him mixed up with Newey Scruggs, but he came up to me and he said, Cheryl, you put me on a team with a bunch of ballers. They all came in with their own balls, and they looked really serious. And this was actually one of Evans Engraving's team, and one of the teams did actually win second place. But, I told him, there were some people that came in there. There are people who come in there who never bowl, and there are people, which I want to say, say, please get well, Terry Allen from Real Men Cook, because I understand he had to go to the hospital because he actually fell on a lane. And we've had a few injuries over the years, but we had a number of, it was fun last night, wasn't it, Andrew?
Oh, absolutely. I'm still draining now. And Royalyn, I bowl well, but here's the key. When you come, a lot of people, look at quality as it's kept, a lot of people practice maybe a month or two before. So you can fine-tune your bowling before you come out, and you'll be okay. But you get, 3 free strikes. So if you're doing well, we'll add some free strikes as well.
That sounds like a plan, and I appreciate that tip, Andrew, of preparation.
Right. And you bring the whole family. We have a place where we have like 4 lanes. It's usually sponsored by McDonald's, and the kids go down there and they bowl and they have a good time. So they're not up in adult faces and everything. Adults can have their fun and do things, and it's and we're raising scholarships, and it's a family affair, and we need to do more family things. Bring, I was telling some people, bring your kids, and one guy, I told him even about a reception. I said, he said, well, I don't want to bring the kids with him. My wife was at work, and I said, you know what? If we don't start bringing our kids to restaurants and events and programs until they're old enough to go, that we deem them old enough, they don't ever learn how to act.
That's right. That's right.
And so I said, and I told him, I said, anytime I'm doing something, I said, please know that it is kid-friendly. I said, now, you got to realize I'm from the old school, and if your kid is doing something inappropriate, I will say something to them. And they said, we're from the old school, too, and we expect you to say something.
That's right. Takes a village, doesn't it?
Yeah, it takes, and then, too, I remember so many people who checked me, so I got to get my check-ins. I got some for some people. So, no, but really, if we don't, we need to, get our young people, let them go out and see. Some of those things are so cheap, take them to a professional game. Yes, some of them are pretty high, but some of them are inexpensive, even if it's arena football or something. Let them get out and run around and experience things. Take them to museums and places where they learn you can look and don't touch.
Yes.
And we
that
make
is
excuses.
So good.
We make excuses. But we thank you for your time, and we appreciate you, and we'll be talking soon, okay?
Sounds good. Good being with you, Cheryl and Andrew.